Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending, and for those of you joining us online, hello. My name is John Mulligan. I am Head of Sustainability Strategy at the World Gold Council. I'm also President of the Sustainable Development Commission for Cibjo, the World Jewelry Confederation. Now, we're here today to talk about sustainability in the gold and precious metals sector. That's a pretty broad topic. But luckily, we're joined by people from various aspects of the supply chain, or those that advise and counsel them. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Dr. Jonathan Jodry, of Metalor, Business Development Director. We have Vanni of Italpreziosi, the CSR Director. We've got Estelle Levin-Nally, the CEO and founder of Levin Sources. And we have, at the end, Damiano Zito, who's the CEO and chair of Progold. So we have refiners. We're very fortunate to have two refiners on a panel. Not always easy to find two refiners to talk. We have somebody towards the end of the supply chain on the fabrication and technology side. And then we have Estelle with a wealth of knowledge and experience in advising various sectors, but also those in the precious metals and supply chain space. Now, I'd like to just start by setting the scene, if you like, by describing what I call a hypothesis. And that is, when we're talking about sustainability, we're often combining a number of concepts. And foundational, I think, something that underpins all of those concepts in terms of impacts and social and environmental impact, is this issue of responsible sourcing. So I think we need to start there. Kind of, what do we mean by responsible sourcing? Now, the hypothesis that I want to test during this conversation, and I want it to be a conversation, please feel free to interrupt each other if you wish. The hypothesis is that responsible sourcing is foundational, but it isn't sufficient if we want to have a positive impact. That we need to, yes, get our house in order, we need to better manage our supply chains, but then we need to look beyond, we need to look outward, beyond the factory gate, as it were, to consider the broader indirect impacts on the wider world, and as I mentioned, this issue of social and environmental outcomes. So that's going to be the overarching theme that I hope we'll come back to. But first of all, I'd like to ask some of the panelists, what do we mean by responsible sourcing? What does it mean for them, both in theory and in practice? And I'm going to start by asking you, Jonathan. You're a very established refiner, and I think it's really important that when we talk about responsible sourcing, we acknowledge the strategic importance of the refiner at the key intermediate point between upstream and downstream players. And when it comes to challenges and risks, they're often the pinch point. So I think it's, as I say, we're really fortunate to have two refiners today. Jonathan, what is Metalor's core philosophy, foundational principles with regards responsible sourcing? Well, let's start there.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So I don't think it's so difficult to have refiners coming and speak with the jewelry industry. I think it's more that we are not invited very often. I think that's probably the action of our president, Gaetano Cavalieri, makes two refiners in the seat. I think I completely agree with you. I see the role of us, refiner, as kind of gatekeeper in the precious metal industry. So we are really here to filter and work only with material we are comfortable handling, and we believe our end customer, including obviously the jewelry market, is comfortable working with. That would be really if I should say in one sentence, what is for us responsible sourcing? It's to ensure that nothing enters in any of our refinery, no material enter, that we cannot personally vouch for the origin of the material the way it was obtained, and we are ensuring that anyone using that material share the same principle. The problem is you will ask refiners and they will all tell you the same. They will all tell you that we are all respecting the rules, the regulations, that we are also all buying to existing standards, and it's probably true. I'm pretty sure it's true. But really, when we are talking about responsible sourcing, it goes farther than that. It goes to a point that you can really guarantee with an extremely high level of confidence. I'm a scientist, I never say 100%, but with a very, very high level of confidence that the material you are sourcing and you are putting on the market is not tainted.
Okay. So that's a position of, dare I say, risk aversity. You're first of all de-risking your supply chain.
It is, and you're right. And I think we will, during this conversation, will go, is it enough? And we probably all agree it's not enough. Today, the main factor we are considering is the risk. Because, to be honest, it's also the factor which is easiest to quantify.
Thanks, and I think it'll be useful to return to that concept of manageable risk and risk appetite during the conversation. As we're talking to refiners, Alice, and first of all, sorry, I did not thank the Italian exhibition group for inviting us all and refiners to the table, and thank, obviously, Dr. Gaetano Cavalieri, who has been fundamental in bringing us together. But Alice, you're a refiner. I think it's fair to say that Italpreziosi takes a fairly broad view, both of, we'll come to sustainability impacts, but can you kind of outline your foundational principles, your priorities, if you were, and also touch upon how they're evidenced? How do you demonstrate them to your stakeholders and clients, etc.?
Thank you for the question, John. I will link up for what Jonathan said first. Responsible sourcing is about managing the risk related to your supply chain. But what is, how do you get to manage the risk and to know the risk? You need to know your counterpart, and the fundamentals of the responsible sourcing is a strong compliance. And that's what standards allow us to do. Make sure that we have procedures that allow us that we can demonstrate that our supply chain is aligned with the standards through knowing them. John, of course, you mentioned that we have a broader view, because throughout the years, we saw that if you ask a counterpart, a document, a module, like the survey that they have to fill in, that's it, you're in, you're out, this is the risk, okay, we can work together, no, we cannot work together. It was quite like a quite passive, you know, way of working. You're okay or no, you're not okay. And what happened to these counterparts that are not okay and we live outside in the market? They might be in the same level and never improve. So we try to be creative in the way of managing a concept of KYC, which usually is quite boring, you know. It's not the funniest part of the work. And we try to create a concept that goes beyond, which is transforming the know your customer to an empower your customer. So from know your customer, KYC, to EYC. Why? Because when you do your KYC, you get to know everything about the counterpart. So you get to know the flows and you get to know the risk related to that. If you are able and you have the know-how, you can have also the chance to give an opportunity to support this counterpart. If they are aligned with your standards, and maybe they can improve, they can give them recommendation to improve and even be better on environment, on social aspect, even if they are aligned with your standards. If they are not aligned with your standards, you can say, I'm sorry, I cannot open your account now, but you can do this, and give recommendation to make sure that they go out there, they do their homework, but they have a way to improve without letting them know, no, you're not okay for me, ciao, you know? So for doing that, knowledge sharing is crucial, and we created this website called Chain of Information, where we can redirect this counterpart, whether they active their account or not, and there they have all resources by the Worker Council, RGC, LBMA, RMI, and Cibjo, and there they can get information on how to improve. And this is a way to give back to the market. So from know your customer to empower him. And it's very strong and powerful because you can really have a positive impact on someone, whether you work with them or not.
Excellent, thank you. And I just want to mention that in these conversations, anybody who's certainly heard me speak before will hear me talk about trying to encourage, support, collaboration across the industry, but you're also talking about collaborating or certainly supporting your supply chain, even if they seem to be inadequate in some way. And I think that's a very positive step because, frankly, we need to move supply chains along, value chains, not just individual companies. Before I move on, do either of you want to comment on, is there a difference between the various suppliers of sources into the refining process? How different is it dealing with a miner providing doré or newly mined material compared to a scrap supplier, somebody bringing in gold for re-refining? Do any of you have a comment to make on that?
You want to start? Yeah, sure. I mean, following on what Alice said about empowering your customer, sometimes they have so much power. There's no really discussion to have with them. It's a very good point, John. When you are talking with a large-scale mine, which may have assets worth 100 times the asset of a refiner, there is really no discussion. It's either you take the customer or you don't take the customer. There's also usually much less problems. I think the recycling area is interesting because this is genuinely where we see the most willingness to improve. It's very unusual that, at least with the range of customer we are working with, when we ask them to improve specific areas, they are always quite responsive. They are interested in discussing. They don't necessarily always agree. We try to convince them, and obviously at the end we have always the possibility to not deal with them. But there is some kind of exchange that we can have. I can't really talk about ASM because, as you know, Metalor is not involved with ASM except through specific programs like Swiss Better Gold. So I think you may be better suited.
There's totally difference between what material enter the refiner and so also the KYC involved with that, between recycled and mined, and within recycled there are even more differentiality and mined too. So you mentioned ASM, but there is also medium scale mining and then large scale mining. So of course, large-scale miners usually are big entities that are well structured and organized. It depends on the vision of the board at the top on sustainability, but usually, even by regulations they are under, they must comply in certain way. While medium scale and small SMEs in mining, they need support sometimes. Most of the time, not all the times, because there are very, very visionary miners that are even small, but they can actually have a better vision than large scale mining. But usually they need support also in funding or in creating proper strategies. And this is something we have been trying to work out throughout the years, how to support them. And the question changes, of course, and you always have to contextualize where you are in the country and how big the entity is and how it's organized within them. But in the Know Your Customer process, you have always to make sure that whoever is in front of you is not just a document, but they know what's written in the document, they apply that. And this is for mining and also for recycled. Recycled is no less risk than mining. Indeed, with mining you have the origin, while with recycle, of course, you have an origin, of course, which is less precise, because that origin can be from many, many years, many, many different places, and you have to be careful on what kind of recycle are handling, from scrap, industrial, or if there are bars, melted bars, and so on. And we know very well that there have been definition on that to support also a better recognition on how to handle that. But yeah, the KYC changes a lot depending on the counterpart you have. But again, you can also support depending on what are their needs. And on the ESG side, we will talk about it later, but we need to be capillary when we manage this part because they are two completely different things and they have different risk to handle.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to come to you, Damiano, because I think it's interesting to know how you, towards the end or later in the supply chain, how do these sourcing issues affect your business as a kind of cutting-edge technologist and fabricator? You know, are they relevant? Do you think about these things, and how do you think about them?
Okay, my answer is, of course they are relevant, but perhaps not really in the way that someone might expect. It is not much that we impose strict requirement to refiners. It's much more the dynamics of sourcing itself that is strongly influencing our decision. The key challenge is that very often we do not understand why some refiner can consistently provide recycled metals according, for example, the RGC standard, or another, they are struggling to do so. And for this reason, we are compelled to work with multiple suppliers. But this choice brings another consequence, the need to qualify more materials. And now, in case of our internal procedure, we are also forced to qualify more material. And then our qualification process is never 100% conclusive. So to truly identify typical, for example, typical impurities of one source compared to another one would requires, and I'm not exceeding in my statement, years of in-depth investigation. This creates a complex situation. On one hand, we must ensure certification, sustainability commitments down to the supply chain. On the other hand, the impurities in different sources can directly affect the technological properties of the metal and therefore the quality of the process and the products. This led me to highlight a fundamental tension. Of course, one story is to have $1 billion for investment and then has no need to have a technical characteristic. And another thing is to have a material that need to be put in a process to manufacture jewelry where, for example, even some very small amount of impurity can really change the results. So if sustainability requirements result in metals that, while ethically compliant, are technologically less suitable for the industrial use, then we face a serious problem. For example, gold and silver, in the common opinion, are noble metals, but they are not always pure or super pure. So the people, even when they have to address some technical problem during the manufacturing, they never put under discussion if it's gold or silver. They do, but much more they do with the other components that they put in the material. So from one side, we have the sustainability topics that is mandatory, that is the first, the priority. But from the other side, we have also to understand that we have not to lose the focus that the metal that we purchase from refiners is something that we have to use. And if the first characteristic has to be the responsible sourcing and all that things, but we have not to lose the characteristic of the material that we have to use at the end.
And if I may follow up on this one, because I think this is a very, very interesting topic. We should not forget that those materials are used to do something, to do some product at the end. One question we get often as refiners is, why don't you segregate everything? Why don't you sell ingots from this mine in Peru or only from recycled material from France? Why do you put on the market, mostly in shape of ingots, why do you put gold from multi-sources? And there is this sometimes idea that we do that because we want to hide origins, but it's exactly to your point. The refining process, although it's a very ancient one, it's still quite complex. And to achieve the proper quality of product, of fine gold, fine silver, to have the proper purity, to be able to remove the impurities at the maximum level, but also to do it in a way that you produce as little CO2 as possible, so to make a process which is efficient from the refining point of view. You need to mix the materials to arrive to the proper composition that would be best refined. So when we have more and more requests, more granularity asking us specific types of material, specific origins, sometimes specific mines or collecting points, then it's more and more difficult to achieve the purity we need for your processes.
But in fact, today afternoon, we are talking about sustainability. So if we have some impurities, I just mentioned one that is quite difficult to work with, could be selenium in silver. 1, 2, 3 parts per million is giving trouble for the people who are using that silver, 925 for casting, and then they have cracking, and then they have to recast. So where is the sustainability if then we save on one side and then we spend double on the other side? So that's why it has to be aligned. And John, in the beginning you were talking about communication, and this is one of the main issues. So what I feel on the industry, not at the downstream where we are, so we are between the jewelry producer and the refiners. I will say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the people were asking for, is that metal pure? Now, is that metal recycled? So anymore the question comes from the characteristic itself of the material, but on the, the label that the metal has.
It's a really good point, and one I think that is often, certainly by myself, overlooked. When we're talking about trust and trust in supply chains, you need to trust your materials, and that includes the metallurgy, if you like, the technical quality of the materials, as well as the supply chain issues. Estelle, turning to you, first of all, could you comment on anything you've heard so far? But also I'm interested, because we're talking about sustainability, and I mentioned those big picture challenges, if you will, on how you think responsible sourcing due diligence kind of starts to intersect or provide that foundation for broader impacts.
Thank you, John. How long have we got? Okay, I think the first thing I want to bring to people's attention is that responsible sourcing is just one aspect of responsible business conduct. Responsible business conduct is a body of practices that ensures that a business is delivering on its obligation to society, to respect human rights, and to protect the environment. And sourcing, your thinking about sourcing should come after you've figured out you're thinking about your operations. That over which you have control, your operations, over that over which you have influence, your business relationships, and whether that's to do with the supply chain behind you or the market in front of you. So I just want to make it clear that responsible sourcing is important, but sorting out your own operations is actually the higher priority in sustainable business practice. Now, responsible sourcing is governed by a set of international guidances and guidelines that we use as standard with our clients, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, the United Nations guiding principles for business and human rights. And the guidances, so how you operationalize these guidelines, these rules, are what is being put into practice when a refiner is building its policies and processes for controlling risk in its supply chains. Now, the intent of these international frameworks is to permit and support business to live up to its responsibilities to society. And they were passed by governments for the sake of their nations and their economies. And at the heart of those guidances is the recognition that you cannot eliminate risk. And if you seek to eliminate risk, all you do is keep yourself clean, but the world doesn't improve. Actually, the intent of these frameworks is not just to help every individual look good and feel good, but help them use the power they have in their business relationships to lift the whole system up and move forward. That's why the ethic of continuous improvement, building and using leverage. I love this know your customer, empower your customer or your counterparty. I love that because that really does sum up what's at the heart of responsible sourcing. So that's what I'd want to say. Now, trust. Business is all about trust, especially in jewelry and in minerals. And as somebody that works all along minerals value chains and thinking about sustainability, it's not enough, again, to just look after yourself and your business partners. You have to offer something meaningful for your stakeholders. So I am a commissioner for the Global Investor Commission for Mining 2030, setting expectations for investors. Setting a set of expectations that investors will put on mining companies so that they will deliver on sustainability in line with these international frameworks I was talking about. And I'm co-chair of the working group on meaningful stakeholder engagement and community beneficiation. And I want to talk about this because it comes to the point of trust. Around the world, we are seeing a very large set of mining projects being stalled in Europe, in Chile, wherever you are, because of the legacy and history of bad practices, including by the large-scale mining companies that are generally seen to be less risky. They get it wrong sometimes too, and we know that because we're often brought in to help them clean up the mess when that happens. Nobody's perfect. You have to be comfortable to live with a certain level of risk. If you're not working to build trust at that very point of where you're breaking ground, and that local communities and stakeholders, if they're not happy that you're there, you're not doing your job when it comes to sustainability. So it's not enough to just do due diligence on compliance or conformance with the OECD minerals guidance. You need to be thinking much more broadly than that and asking broader questions and seeing how you can use and build leverage over your supply chains. This matters because if there is an abuse that occurs at a mine or at a provenance, the guidances say don't engage, learn more, figure out if you could have done something differently, remedy, and move forward. Now, if you're connected to that risk just by a business transaction, the level of responsibility over remedying and mitigation may be lower than if you caused that issue. But if you're in business with somebody, you need to understand that, and you need to understand the influence you have, and you need to be able to respond in partnership appropriately to these things. So it is more than just policies and procedures. There is an art and a craft to how we do due diligence. Because if you're only doing it to look after yourself, you're not actually really doing responsible sourcing.
Thank you. And again, that issue of influence, of you don't have control, but you have some degree of ability to affect indirect outcomes, I think is something that's often missed in the conversations because people quite reasonably look to their business first. It's looking, this is what for me sustainability is, it is looking beyond that, looking, as I say, over the fence, over the gate. I'm interested, does that broader perspective that Estelle mentioned, does that resonate with refiners at all? Given, John, I'm going to start with you, John, because you mentioned that risk aversity. Is that something that makes you comfortable, or something that you think is slightly one ask too far?
So I would say, first of all, the risk adversity comes very often in life from bad experience. And the reality is that we are all aware of the OECD guidances, but especially as a refiner, if there is a problem with one of the supplier, at this stage, I can tell you, you are alone. There is no one to defend you. There won't be the organizations you are a member of. They won't tell, yes, this refiner passed all the audits. The trade associations you are part of, no one will stand and say, yes, this is an important member, and they often come and bring good ideas, and they are leader in responsible sourcing. You are going to be alone, and especially you will be alone facing your customers, many of them being in this conference. So I think there is a reality which is, I completely agree with everything you said. We ought to aim to go in that direction. But from the business point of view, it's really difficult to embed that as a risk. So I mean, let's take artisanal and small-scale mining. So Metalor left ASM, it's public knowledge, almost 10 years ago. And we didn't do it because we don't want to be in that sector. We don't want to help those people. We understand, we realize that there are millions of people depending on this. We stopped working there because simply we felt that we are not able, with the resource we have at our disposal, we are not able to reach the level of comfort that allows us to sell this material to one of our customers. At the end, precious metals, very much like gemstones and diamond, the business is really based on a trust. So if our customer cannot trust us, then they will not work with us.
If I may, I completely see that and understand, and it comes from almost a cultural aspect, which is, in order to make responsible sourcing effective, we have to get comfortable with failure, and we have to celebrate those businesses that talk about those failures and share what they've learned and saying, and because we've learned that now, we're going to keep trying. I think this pursuit of perfection as a condition for being able to do business and continue to do business is actually an enormous barrier to sustainability, and a more radical transparency approach that welcomes the ability to talk about failure and to see that as a way of actually growing your trust in an entity, because no enterprise is perfect. All enterprises are ultimately human created, human run, and will have failures. And these guidances essentially say, you can't get rid of all possibility of human rights abuses. Something's going to happen at some point, especially in high-risk environments, whether you're with a large mine or a small mine. But we need you to do business in high-risk environments because that has a stabilizing impact on the economy. I think the difficulty you have as refiners is that your biggest clients are banks. And banks really dictate that they will have no risks. They're conservative with a capital C. In order to support jewelry to continue to pioneer in this space, we in a way, and tell me if this is wrong, but I think we need to get the banks on board to be more enabling and supportive of businesses failing and keeping that business relationship going even if and when that happens. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, Jonathan.
Well, I certainly do, but I don't know if you already tried to make a bank change its policy. It's pretty complicated.
Yes, and of course, especially because the compliance, the way their compliance world is built up, and it in fact creates a schizophrenia between that compliance environment and requirements versus the compliance or conformance environment for responsible sourcing. There's a gap there that we're really struggling to bridge. But there must be some spaces through which we can start to experiment with that and make it more possible.
I think one thing we have found very useful is specific initiatives that try to, I'm going to use again a banking term, but to edge the risk. And this is, I mentioned Metalor is not doing ASM. It's not completely true. We are working a lot with Swiss Better Gold, as I mentioned before. And this is typically an area where you have an entity which was is co-funded by the Swiss government, having people on the ground, on sites, which brings a level of confidence that any refiner cannot attain by itself. And I think this is perhaps the right direction to go. It's to work with local initiatives where you have some oversight that allows, I would, again, I'm using a risk term, but it would be a risk sharing. We are not completely adverse to risk because business is a risk, as we all know in this room, especially now when you need to ship something to US. But the reality is that you don't want to have one party in the whole supply chain to bear all the risk because then it's unsustainable for that party.
Hence collaboration.
So I'm
as
glad
part
you.
of the solution. Lovely segue.
Thank you. I actually had written risk sharing, honestly, as before you spoke, Jonathan. So I think that concept of risk sharing, and we're still trying to work out what it means in practice. I do think, whilst I agree with Estelle that we have to have a culture that accepts failure as part of the process, the culture is broader than the gold supply chain, precious metal supply chain, and certainly when it comes to banking, you're talking about a fairly large sector, as Jonathan said, that's quite difficult to influence. Nonetheless, we will continue to try. But when we're talking about, for this audience and this industry, there is that aspect of foundational resources to get to a level where you have a fairly shared playing field of knowledge. And I think we're still trying to do that, because this is a very broad, globally diverse industry. There's jewelry industries in pretty much every country on the planet, different materials and so on. So how do we establish a fairly level playing field and a fairly shared set of understandings? Now, you know, Cibjo is hosting this, and one of Cibjo's missions is to try and contribute to that. And certainly, I'm honored to be part of that process. There have been, in the last few years, a lot of materials, resources, tools trying to support the industry, and I think that support is key. And please feel free for anybody to comment on, you know, resources and tools that you found. I'm going to talk to Damiano first. Does Damiano, you know, as I say, you're towards the end of the supply chain, and you're, you know, a specific part in it. Are people aware of these tools? Are you aware of these tools, the Cibjo tools, the Watch and Jewelry Initiative tools? You know, are they aware of them, and perhaps more importantly, are they meaningful to you?
Not really. There is a very little awareness overall, and this is true even among the largest group in our industry. From my perspective, for example, even big companies are outsourcing significant parts of their jewelry production through some external networks, suppliers, and those are not fully informed and engaged in these frameworks. And let me give an example. Of course, it is slightly off the topic, but very, very, very telling. In 2023, I was participating in a meeting in Brussels organized by the European Precious Metals Federation regarding the new requirements for labeling and safety practices connected to the silver toxicity. Out of the entire jewelry industry, there were virtually no jewelers present, maybe one or two responses during the European Chemicals Agency public consultation process. And this is something that is very much impacted our business. This shows that even with more stringent regulatory driving issues that is just voluntary, sustainability initiative, the jewelry sector is very often absent. From what I see, it is fundamentally a cultural issue, and it will take time. At the recent De Vicenza Symposium that was closing just yesterday about the jewelry technology, there was a live poll asking what would most likely drive awareness and adoption of sustainability practices in jewelry and manufacturing sector. And the answer, the most popular, was the regulation. So this is telling that maybe today many of these practices are voluntary, or at least for the typical size of the companies that we have in jewelry industry. I'm not talking about the super big enterprises. At the present, we are leaving too much responsibility to consumers, asking them to choose brands based on sustainability commitments. But the reality is that we have to consider that this should be something like a part of the game. The things should start like not something. It should be the reality is that mass consumers are still far more influenced by price than by sustainability. And sustainability become a consumer-driven choice. It is risk becoming a competitive advantage for someone that is mainly talking about something that should be the minimum requirement to play the game. So, in my personal opinion, I think that this is a process that is very much connected to the culture that we have in jewelry. And so if I have to answer your question, John, I do believe that there is not really very much awareness.
And if I may recall, since we don't have slides, I think having a look at the title behind is interesting. We are talking gold and precious metal sectors. And in fact, gold has a very specific position within the precious metals. And when you go to PGMs, platinum, palladium, or we go to OPM, iridium, ruthenium, rhodium, you see that the sustainability, the response, even the responsible sourcing are less and less relevant. And there are several reasons for that. Also because they are more technological products. Similarly to what, Damiano, you are using. For you, gold is a technological product in your company, not really a jewelry product, right? No. I think the further you are from an end consumer, the less you are likely to be really impacted by media, by questions, and that's why perhaps we talk a lot about gold, but in fact everything we say now should apply and shall apply to all precious metals.
Absolutely, and I think, just to reflect on my own career, it pivoted towards sustainability because gold gets that scrutiny. Gold, because it's both a financial instrument and a commodity and a luxury item, luxury good, or technological material, it gets a lot of scrutiny from multiple stakeholders, and that means there are greater demands on it, but also is an opportunity to kind of drive, as you say, Jonathan, the whole precious metal sector forward. Estelle, I think you wanted to say something.
I think it's understandable and required that companies look at their precious metals value chains from the point of view of controlling risk, and indeed that's legally mandated under the US Dodd-Frank Act and the EU Conflict Minerals Regulation for gold. But the thing with responsible sourcing is that when you look at things just from the point of view of managing risk, you take a compliance-led approach that basically says this is a cost center, we need to do it as cheaply as possible. And what you lose is that opportunity to capture additional commercial value from actually seeing it as an opportunity, not just for differentiation in the market, which is one possibility, but also for improving internal culture, for talent acquisition and retention, et cetera, et cetera. There are multiple ways in which it can be value generating that I think many businesses don't really work through because they're so busy seeing it as just about risk.
I absolutely agree. And I think if you look at the geopolitical shifts, I think unfortunately they've reinforced that short-term burden view. It's understandable, but unfortunately missing the long-term opportunities. I was going to come to Alice. John, do you have anything quick to say?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but this cost has also to be borne by someone. Refiners are just intermediates, and everyone in the jewelry sector has to realize that the end product is going to be more expensive and has to be ready to bear that extra cost. And you would be surprised how little, a large part, not all, but a large part of the jewelry industry is adverse to any increase on the price, especially right now with the gold price going up. There is this feeling that, oh, my gold costs 30% more than last year. All this extra cost should be covered. Well, no, because no one really covers for those costs.
Okay, so I'm going to put a slightly, what I hope will be a counter view, or at least a complementary view to this, and that is that we've talked about risk aversion, and I said this is about sustainability on top of responsible sourcing, which means that sustainability for me, we have a framework. We have the UN SDGs, which basically say here's a range, a spectrum of challenges that we need to address. So risk aversity, to Estelle's point, risk aversity, frankly, will probably hold us back from trying to address those to some extent. Alice, Italpreziosi, I think it's fair to say, has embraced the vision of those broader objectives. Do you want us to just talk about how you as a refiner still wish to have impacts beyond your direct supply chain in terms of climate, nature, social impacts, etc.?
Okay. So I would like to go back to so many topics that I've been saying. I didn't know how to get into it, but first of all, risk. We mentioned risk. We have to remember that sustainability is about managing risk, also sustainability. So it's not just responsible sourcing. So first of all, I would like to say, and what Jonathan mentioned before, which is crucial, that most of the time refiners are left alone. So there's and remember that no journal or media out there are talking about the good things happening. They just get the interest in getting to let know when things are bad. And the bad thing about nowadays is that the good things happening are not catching enough. And what happened is that reputation is actually linked to this public vision of the company. I can tell that I'm very lucky because our CEO and founder, Ivana Ciabatti, is very inspirational and she's very courageous because to take a risk and to make sure that you can have an impact on even a small scale mining and community that needs, it's courageous nowadays because tomorrow there's something bad happening, as Estelle was mentioning. It's not your direct operation, it's an indirect operation. You can have all of the checks you can, but there can be some flows happening, and it's not up to you. You're making your best. And tomorrow there's a new going out, oh, Italpreziosi buying the wrong thing. Well, we have been very proud of working to make a better world and a better industry, because if no one is willing to take that risk, we are not going anywhere. And so, especially in a jewelry show where there's this adversity to risk, when we talk about risk, everyone are afraid. If no one is willing to take risk, precious metal is not risk-free. So sometimes I get requests about, I would like zero risk as precious metal. I don't know how to answer to that, but we need to be more courageous and bold and more unified, because it would be amazing if tomorrow there's, I don't know, bad news coming out and people stand up and say, well, at least they're making something to have a difference in the industry rather than pointing and, I don't know, saying nothing about all of the work that's behind, because I'm very proud of, and as Jonathan might be, about our compliance office working every day, not just to screen everything entering in our operation, but making sure we can support our counterparts to improve. So improvement doesn't come with flowers and things nice. It comes with heavy work, hard work, and courage. And we're very lucky to have the vision of Ivana Ciabatti on that has been trying with her position also in the industry to make a movement and create coordination. And I think the problem about the question you made before, there are so many tools out there, maybe too many, but the problem is that the lack of coordination. We make to ease everything and make sure that these tools are available in an easy way so that everyone, like Damiano and everyone, can access that. And there must be engagement in the supply chain. The Watch and Jewelry Initiative 2030, for example, is doing it, putting together big brands, medium brands, small scale companies, together under the same roof, even companies that has very different level of sustainability, because they can be mentored by those that has. So it's not something you change in one day. So there are initiatives doing it. There is company like we are trying to do that. Alone you don't do anything, but together we can. Cibjo is doing it. It's about connecting and make it easy for company out there to understand. But we need to be more unified and fight against the wrong information and misleading information, because of course the jury is terrified of having a bad news tomorrow, as we are, because it's not good. We hard work every day to avoid any bad news. But we should get out there with good news too. I know it's a general thing, but it's not just related to the industry. Bad news are more catchy. It's unfortunate. But let's bring out there like also the good work that is happening. And when bad things happen, not just say pointing, say they failed because maybe it was not their fault, because someone, an individual did something, but say bravo, they at least try to make a difference, and they will keep doing it. And we proudly, whatever comes up there, will keep working every day, taking risk, but taking risk with the objective to make a difference. We are a benefit corporation, so in our statutes, we have our mandate to have a good impact on shareholders, but also on stakeholders and sustainability and communities. We are certified under the B Corp, and for us, it's not marketing at all. It's something we believe. And so there's a lot to be done. Sustainability is not about marketing, it's about taking risk to make sure that you will have a long business in the long run, you know. If you want to strive in the future, you have to commit with what also regulation are going to be asking, the CSDDD and CSRD and so on. So Rome wasn't built in one day, but we need to collaborate, create trust, and do, not just talk. Take risk.
Thank you. And you mentioned the Washington Jewelry Initiative 2030 and Cibjo's resources and tools. Just a plug for tomorrow, there'll be a discussion on those issues, so please come and attend. Damiano, hopefully we'll start to inform you of the things that you don't know about, and others in the room. We're running out of time, so I'm sorry I'm going to have to skip some of the discussion I'd like to have on ASM and so on, and ask you, you mentioned about the positives. You mentioned, you know, how do we incentivize change in a positive way rather than just fear, compliance, even just regulatory pressure. So I'm going to ask you, each of you in turn, what do you think, in your opinion, might be the most significant factor? What issue, what resource might be the most significant factor in driving or galvanizing positive change? I'm going to start at the end, Damiano.
My personal opinion is cannot be something like an option. So Alicia was saying that they are taking risks, but I will mostly believe that it should be the minimum requirement to play. So that's why if there is not a regulation, one company appears better than another one, and the final consumer, finally they choose that they bring this kind of risk or good way of doing your activities as something better than the other one. And I do believe that the regulation is the main thing. I wanted to bring an example that is, even this one is a bit off topics, but 40, 50 years ago in Italy, all the domestic jewelry was really very much on the ground. Then if you watch today, it's totally different. And if someone is doing something, is an outcast. And how we did? Control, check, rules, and all that things. Maybe in 1,000 years, we could expect that intentionally we could really move without any rules. But today, even the speed limits need something that controls the speed. And even if it's a bit sad, because we should really do intentionally, I believe that is something that we need to do. And of course, panel like this, keep speaking, keep talking, and then the governments or who are really writing down the laws, they are in somehow try to use our voices in a way that finally the day that they impose will be something that is also sustainable to impose. In another side, of course, a big company, for them is mandatory, but everyone working in jewelry, they know that when we are talking about a company with 100 employees, is considered a big company. So, but those companies are not in the box of the one that has the rule as a mandatory.
So I think you're saying we need baseline regulations that apply to all, not as we have at the moment with just large corporations and nobody else.
Of course, it's a part of the process. I'm not surprised. I'm thinking that if we go back 2,000 years ago when they were going to the Colosseum and they were killing people and everyone will say, wow, wow, wow. And maybe in 1,000 years ahead, they will see a football match and they see that they kicked the leg and they will be a scandal because no one more will touch each other.
So I like the fact that you've cast it 2,000 years in the past and 1,000 years in the future. That is the long view indeed. Jonathan?
Unusual answer from me. I think we need more fundamental research on multiple topics, on how to trace material, how to understand where the material is coming from, how to improve processes, how to render those processes more environmentally friendly. I think on every single step, whether it's ASM, large-scale mining, refining, we have not seen that much development from academic, industrial processes. And I think that this is something we have put aside for a very long time, which is missing, in my opinion.
I think it's a really good point. Yeah, data research. I just very quickly, because we're running out of time. When it came to looking at climate 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was shocked how little the industry had done, but how little academia had done. There was very few people looking at this at all. So absolutely, a foundational level of data and knowledge. Alice.
I will go far from Jonathan. I would say more action, because we have so many tools out there. Maybe we can simplify for small-scale companies, smaller-scale SMEs, but more action and make sure that making a company understand that starting collecting data, it's okay, don't be afraid if they're perfect, just start to understand what you're doing, ask your counterparts, because when you ask them, you're actually having your measurement of your indirect impact, but you're also helping them to start reporting. So action, we have to start taking action. We are a little bit late on that.
Get started is usually my message too, so yeah. Estelle.
Well, I've got 5 things noted down, I know, and I've got 1 minute. Look, I loved your point earlier about ambition and courage. Sorry, it was courage. We need more courage. And I think I want to reiterate the point I made. We have to have courage to fail. Actually, the best lessons in life come from failure. And so the knowledge that we're looking for greater data, greater information, will also come from having the courage to fail and the safe space that we can build as a community to support each other to fail. I loved your point, Jonathan, about collaboration and joint initiatives. I absolutely agree that is where it is safest and easiest to fail. So there is a role for Cibjo, there is a role for the Watch and Jewelry Initiative, for other industry associations, for the World Bank's Mining Better Together program. There's a role to make that space. We then need people to participate and give the time to be part of it.
Thank you. We are out of time, so I'll wind up and thank my panelists. There won't be time for questions, but I think it's fair to say that any of you are staying around a little time, so please come and ask us directly. I just want to link this conversation because still, I think within the jewelry sector and other sectors, frankly, sustainability is seen as an add-on. It's seen as something that comes sort of after you've done everything else, if you've got time and money and so on. But earlier, in the future trends discussion, one of the speakers said, the jewelry consumer, the younger jewelry consumer, is looking for meaning, identity, and intention. And she described intention as value-based action from the consumer. And what are those values? And that's frankly what we've been talking about today. Some of it can seem a little dry in terms of regulation, frameworks and so on. But in the end, we're talking about value-driven actions and how we communicate them across the market. So I want to leave that with you to say the relevance of these things, even if they aren't immediately clear, should become clear. And as Alice said, we should all get started. Thank you.